I exposed my husband cheating with my sister-in-law at my mom's 60th birthday. When she said she was pregnant with his baby, I played their secret recording about stealing my inheritance in front of everyone. I want to tell you exactly how I planned it. Not because I'm proud of it. I am, actually. But because the planning is the whole story. Because everything that happened at my mother's 60th birthday party in front of 43 people, including my grandmother and my mother's pastor, happened the way it happened because I had spent 11 days making very specific decisions in a very specific order. The affair I found out about on a Thursday. The recording I found 4 days later. The party was 11 days after that. I could have acted immediately. I could have confronted my husband the night I found out. I could have called my sister-in-law and said I know. I could have done any of the things you do in the first wave of something like this when you're operating on pure reaction. I didn't do any of that. I made a grocery list instead. I went to bed. And in the morning I started planning. Dennis left his email open on the shared laptop on a Thursday evening. He was in the shower. I sat down to check something for work. The inbox was visible before I could navigate away. His name and Bridget's name in the subject line of a thread going back 4 months. 4 months. I didn't open it. I looked at the subject line and the sender name in the preview text for about 10 seconds and then I understood what I was looking at. I navigated away. Went to the kitchen. Poured water. Stood at the sink. He came out of the shower. We had dinner. I answered questions about my day. We watched something on television and I laughed at the right moments. We went to bed. In the morning I waited for him to leave for work. Then I opened the email thread. 4 months. Documented. No ambiguity. The kind of thing that is not a gray area. I read the whole thread. Start to finish. An hour and 40 minutes. Then I looked at the date of the first email. 3 weeks after my father died. My father passed 8 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed in March. Gone by October. The worst 6 months of my life and the 6 months during which my husband apparently started sleeping with my brother's wife. 3 weeks after I buried my father, my husband started this. I closed the laptop. Got in the shower. Let the water run hot for a long time. When I got out I made a list. Things I needed to do. In order. Day 1 through 4, I gathered. I didn't move anything. Didn't change anything. Didn't give any indication that Thursday had happened differently than every other Thursday. Dennis came home. We had dinner. I asked about his day. I listened to the answers knowing what I knew and cataloged the gap between what he said and what was true. Day 2 I called my attorney. A woman I had consulted once before on an unrelated matter. I told her what I had found. She walked me through the divorce landscape. I took notes. Day 3 I met with a financial advisor. Because of the inheritance. My father's estate was not complicated but it was substantial. He was a careful man who had built things carefully over 40 years. The estate was in a trust. My mother was the primary beneficiary. After her, the secondary beneficiaries were split between me and Leon. My portion was significant. Dennis knew about it. He'd known since my father's diagnosis. We had discussed it in the context of planning. What we might do with it. Home renovations. Investments. A trip we'd been talking about for years. Normal conversations between a husband and wife who expect to face their financial future together. Day 4 changed what I understood about those conversations. Day 4 I found the recording. Not by searching for it. By accident, the same way most things in my life have revealed themselves. I was cleaning out a kitchen drawer. The kind of cleaning that happens when your hands need something to do while your head is processing. I found Dennis's old phone. He'd upgraded 8 months ago. The old phone had been sitting in the drawer. I charged it out of habit. Turned it on. It connected to our Wi-Fi automatically. There was a voice memo application on the phone. I don't know why I opened it. Instinct. The same instinct that had made me read the email thread to the end. 11 recordings. Most of them old. Work calls Dennis had recorded for reference. The last one was dated 6 weeks ago. Duration, 41 minutes. I pressed play. It was Dennis and Bridget. In the voice memo you can hear ambient sound first. A restaurant, I think. Then their voices becoming clearer as one of them must have set the phone down on a table. I listened to all 41 minutes. By the end I was sitting on the kitchen floor. The recording was a conversation about the inheritance. Specifically about how to access my portion of it before or during what they call the transition. They used that word. Transition. As if my discovery of the affair and the subsequent divorce were already a planned event on a calendar. Something to navigate rather than something to prevent. Bridget said, once the trust distributions happen, it gets harder to argue for commingling. Dennis said, that's why the timing matters. If we're married when her portion distributes, she doesn't have clean grounds to argue it's separate property. Bridget said, how long do you think you can maintain it? Dennis said, long enough. She doesn't look. He said, she doesn't look. Sitting on my kitchen floor listening to my husband describe my trusting nature as a strategic asset. She doesn't look. I sat there for about 20 minutes. Then I stood up. Put the phone in my bag. Sent my attorney a text that said I have something additional to discuss. Send it from the bathroom so Dennis wouldn't see my screen. Then I went back to the kitchen and made dinner. Day 5 through 10, the plan. My attorney first. I played her the recording over the phone. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, do not delete that. Do not share it. Do not tell anyone you have it. I need to look at a few things. She called back the next day. Said, in this state, a recording of your own home environment where you are a party to the property is admissible. The trust distribution question is separate, and we need to look at the timing. The divorce filing will need to happen before certain dates. She said, how do you want to handle this? I told her. She was quiet again. Then she said, that will create a public record. I said, I know. She said, do you want me to talk you through the more private approach? I said, no. My mother's 60th birthday party is in 11 days. Dennis and Bridget will both be there. Leon will be there. 40-something people. My grandmother. I want to use the time to prepare, and I want it to happen there. My attorney said, I've had some unusual clients, but you're organized. I said, I manage projects. She said, I can tell. We talked for an hour about the specific sequence. What needed to happen legally before the party. What I needed to document. What she needed to file. What the recording established and how to use it correctly. I also called my mother. Not about everything. About some things. I needed her not to be blindsided. I needed her to know enough to hold herself together when it happened. I needed her to be my mother in that room rather than a woman hearing something for the first time. I drove to her house on day 6. Sat at her kitchen table. The same one I've sat at my whole life. I told her about the affair. I told her about the recording. I told her what I was planning to do at her party. She listened. Her face did things I won't describe because they belonged to her. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, you're sure? I said yes. She said, your father would have said get a lawyer first. I said, I got the lawyer second, but she's fully briefed. My mother said, that's close enough. She held my hand for a minute. Then she said, you need to eat something. She made me lunch. That's my mother. World collapsing, she makes lunch. Day 11. The party? 43 people. My mother's living room and the connected dining room opened up the way it gets for big gatherings. Catered food. A cake someone had ordered. Streamers in my mother's favorite color. The good tablecloths. Dennis was in a good mood. He'd been in a good mood for 11 days, and it turned my stomach in a specific way to watch him being charming at a party he didn't know was the last normal thing he was going to experience for a long time. Bridget arrived with Leon and Cora an hour in. Bridget hugged me. I hugged her back. Felt her arms around me and thought about 41 minutes of audio and my husband's voice saying she doesn't look. I looked. I had been looking for 11 days. We circulated. We ate. Dennis made people laugh. Bridget helped my mother with something in the kitchen, and they were in there together for 20 minutes, and I watched it from across the room. My mother caught my eye from the kitchen doorway. I nodded once. She nodded back. The plan was simple. My mother would call for the toast around 8:30. Her brother would say a few words first. Then she would say she wanted to give the floor to her daughter. That was me. I had a Bluetooth speaker I'd connected to my phone 2 hours before. Set up in the corner of the living room behind the side table with the framed photos. Close enough to be clearly audible. Far enough that it wasn't obvious. I had the recording queued. I had a second item queued after the recording. I had the folder in my bag. The one my attorney had put together. Printed. Organized. I had spoken to Leon that afternoon. 15 minutes in my car before he arrived with Bridget and Cora. I had told him everything. His face went through several things. When he was done going through them, he said, "What do you need from me tonight?" I said, "Stay close to Cora. That's it. Keep her with you." He nodded. He said, "I'm sorry, Naomi." I said, "You didn't do anything." He said, "She's my wife." I said, "She was also my friend. We can process that later. Tonight I need you to stay close to Cora." He said he would. 8:32. My mother's brother gave his remarks. Short and warm. My mother pretended to cry in the theatrical way she does when she's moved and doesn't want to fully show it. Then my mother said, "I want to give the floor to my daughter. Naomi has something she wants to say." Every head in the room turned to me. Dennis was across the room. Champagne glass. Smiling. Expectant. He thought this was a toast. Bridget was next to him. Of course she was. In hindsight, she was always next to him at social events, and I had filed it away as friendliness and hadn't looked. I looked now. I said, "Mom, I love you. 60 years of you being the person I run to when everything falls apart. Tonight is a little bit that." A few people laughed softly. Sweet, they thought. I said, "I found out 11 days ago that my husband has been having an affair for 4 months. With Bridget." The room went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator from the kitchen. Dennis's champagne glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Bridget's face went the specific white of someone watching a building fall. I said, "I also found a recording. And I want to play it for the family before I say anything else. Because what's on this recording isn't just about the affair." I pressed play on my phone. The speaker in the corner filled the room. 41 minutes is too long for a party. I had edited it. My attorney and I had gone through it on day 8 and identified the 11 minutes that established what needed to be established. The conversation about the transition. The trust distributions. The commingling. The timing. And the part where Dennis said she doesn't look. Those 11 minutes played in my mother's living room in front of 43 people, including my grandmother and my mother's pastor and Ennis's work colleague who had driven from 2 hours away to celebrate and had no idea what he had driven into. I watched Dennis while it played. He didn't move for the first 2 minutes. Then he set his champagne glass down very carefully on the end table next to him. The careful way you do things when your hands need something to do and your brain is managing a crisis. I watched Bridget. She was looking at the floor by minute 3. By minute 7 she had moved slightly away from Dennis in the way people do when proximity to someone suddenly feels like liability. By minute 9 Leon had walked to the corner of the room where Cora was playing with something on the floor and picked her up and was holding her facing away from the center of the room. The 11 minutes ended. The room was still quiet. Then my grandmother, who is 84 years old and has seen considerable things in those 84 years, said, "Lord have mercy." And the room exhaled. Dennis spoke first. He said, "This is not the place for this." I said, "I chose the place. You chose the situation." He said, "Naomi, you don't understand the full." I said, "Dennis? I listened to 41 minutes. You said she doesn't look." I looked. I looked for 11 days. My attorney has already filed. You'll receive the paperwork this week. He said, "You filed?" I said, "On day 8. He looked at me with something I hadn't seen from him before. Not guilt exactly. The specific expression of a man realizing that the person he'd been underestimating had been several steps ahead of him for longer than he knew. I said, "I also want everyone to know something about the inheritance situation. My attorney has the recording. The trust has been notified. The distribution is being structured specifically to prevent commingling during the divorce proceedings. She's very good at her job." My mother's brother, who is a quiet man, said, "Someone needs to call this what it is." I said, "It's fraud. That's what my attorney called it. The affair is one thing. What they were planning to do with my father's estate is another thing with different legal implications." The room had opinions about this. Multiple people had opinions simultaneously. Bridget said she was pregnant. Not right away. About 10 minutes into the chaos, when the room was loud and people were talking and Dennis had walked to one corner and Leon had walked out to the back porch with Cora and my mother was holding my hand on the couch. Bridget said, "I think everyone should know that I'm pregnant." She said it to the room generally, but she was looking at me. I looked back at her. I said, "How far along?" She said, 10 weeks. I said, "Have you told Leon?" She said, I was going to tell him tonight." I said, "You were going to tell him tonight that you're 10 weeks pregnant by my husband. At my mother's birthday party." She said, "That's not how I said, "Bridget, I don't have anything else to say to you tonight. I think you should go find my brother." She looked at me for a moment. Then she went to find my brother. I don't know what that conversation on the back porch looked like. Leon hasn't described it to me in detail and I haven't asked. What I know is that he came back inside 20 minutes later without Bridget. He had Cora asleep on his shoulder. He walked across the room to where I was sitting with my mother. He sat next to me. He said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I will be." He said, "Me too. Eventually." My mother took both our hands. We sat there while the room around us processed the rubble of what the night had become. The party ended early. People left in clusters. Some of them hugged me. Some of them didn't know what to do and stood near the door for a moment too long before someone guided them out. My mother's pastor stopped and said something to me I don't fully remember but felt like the right thing at the right time. Dennis left without speaking to me again. He took his jacket from the hook by the door and walked out, and I watched him go the way you watch something you've already made your peace with leaving. My grandmother, last to leave because she refuses to be rushed, held my face in both her hands on the way out and said, "Your father raised a strong woman." Then she left. My mother and I cleaned up together. Didn't talk much. Put food away. Folded the good tablecloths. Took down streamers. Around midnight she said, "I'm sorry your father missed this." I said, "Which part?" She said, "The part where his daughter showed them exactly who she is." I hugged her for a long time in her kitchen. Then I drove home to a house I was already in the process of figuring out how to leave. The legal situation. My attorney is excellent. I knew this already, but the next 4 months confirmed it at every turn. The recording established intent regarding the inheritance. Intent is a significant word in fraud proceedings. It doesn't mean the fraud was completed, it means it was planned. Planned with specificity. With a timeline. With an identified target, which was me, and an identified asset, which was my father's estate. The trust was restructured on my attorney's advice before any distributions. My portion was protected. Dennis had no claim to anything predating the marriage, and the effort to establish commingling through timing had been disrupted by the fact that I found the recording 11 days before he expected me to find anything. She doesn't look. I looked. And then I filed. And then I told a room full of people what the recording said before he had a chance to begin managing the narrative. The divorce is not final yet. We're in proceedings. It's moving. My attorney says the fraud element complicates his position considerably and that his attorney is aware of this. I'll leave it there. Leon and Bridget. He told me 3 weeks after the party that he'd moved out. He and Cora are in a 2-bedroom apartment. He takes Cora on the weekends and alternate weeks. They're working out the logistics through mediators because neither of them wants a court battle that Cora will one day be able to read about. He is doing as well as a man can do when he finds out at his sister's mother-in-law's birthday party that his wife is pregnant by his sister's husband. Which is to say, not well, but forward. He goes to work. He calls me on Wednesdays. He makes Cora pancakes on the weekend mornings she's with him, the kind she likes, and she calls him daddy and climbs into his lap, and he is, in the specific way that matters, her father. Whatever Bridget has to figure out about the pregnancy and what comes after, that's hers to figure out. I don't follow it. I don't need the updates. What I follow is Leon. What I follow is Cora calling me Mimi on the phone when Leon lets her call me before bedtime on the nights she's with him. That's what I follow. Dennis. He is in an apartment. I know this because the mail forwarding address his attorney provided is the address of a furnished rental complex on the east side of the city. The kind of place you land when you leave a situation quickly and haven't made longer-term plans. He has called me twice since the party. I answered once. He said he wanted to explain the context of the recording. I said my attorney handles all communication now and he could reach out through her. He said, "Naomi, please." I said, "Dennis? On the recording you said she doesn't look. I want you to know that for 11 days before the party I looked at everything. I looked at every piece of what you were doing. I looked at what you were planning. I looked at what it would cost and what it would take and what the right sequence was." I said, "I looked. And then I acted accordingly." He didn't say anything. I said goodbye. Hung up. I haven't answered since. The inheritance. My father built what he built over 40 years. Careful man. Forward-moving man. The estate he left is going to fund things he would have been glad to see funded. Some of it I've already decided. A scholarship at the school where my mother taught for 31 years. His name on it. Students who need what he always said he needed when he was young, which was someone who believed the numbers were possible. Some of it I'm still deciding. None of it is going to Dennis. I want to say that clearly. None of the thing my father spent his life building is going to the man who sat in a restaurant and discussed the timing of my discovery like it was a project milestone. My father died 8 months ago. 3 weeks later Dennis started an affair with my sister-in-law. 6 weeks before I found out they were planning how to access what my father left me. I'm going to say that again so it lands. My father was 6 weeks in the ground when they sat in that restaurant and talked about my inheritance like it was a resource to be harvested. Like I was a variable in a timeline. Like she doesn't look was a strategic condition they could rely on. They were wrong about the variable. They were wrong about the look. And they found that out in my mother's living room in front of 43 people, including her pastor and her 84-year-old mother. My father raised a strong woman. My grandmother said it on her way out the door, and she was right. The recording. People ask about the recording. Whether I feel bad about playing it publicly. Whether a private confrontation would have been the more dignified path. Here is what I know about a private confrontation. A private confrontation gives the other person the opportunity to manage what you know. To spin it. To get ahead of the narrative. To have 11 days of their own to prepare their version of events before anyone else hears anything. Playing the recording publicly meant there was no version. There was only the recording. In Dennis's voice. In Bridget's voice. In a room full of family who heard it directly and cannot be told later that it was mischaracterized or taken out of context, or that Naomi was upset and not thinking clearly. There is no out of context for 41 minutes of audio. There is no she misunderstood when the words are on the recording. I am not a cruel person. I did not play the recording to humiliate. I played it because the alternative was allowing two people to continue controlling the narrative of my own life and my own father's legacy. I had already spent 4 months inside their plan without knowing it. I was not going to spend another day there. The party was my choice. The timing was my choice. The speaker in the corner was my choice. All of it? Mine. My mother turned 60 in a room that became a different room than the one she planned for. I've thought about that. Whether I should have chosen a different venue. A different moment. I asked her about it recently. On a Sunday. Her kitchen table. Same one. She said, "You could have done it anywhere. You did it there because we were all together. Because there would be no he said she said afterward. Because your grandmother was in that room and she heard it herself and nobody can tell her a different version." She poured more coffee. She said, "Your father used to say the best time to do something necessary is when all the people who need to know are already in the room." She said, "You had everyone in the room." I said, "I'm sorry it was your party." She said, "Baby. I've had a lot of parties. I've never had a night like that one." She didn't say it like it was a complaint. I'm not in the house anymore. I moved out 3 months ago. Found a 2-bedroom. Light in the mornings. Close to my mother. I took the cast iron skillet from the kitchen. I know that seems like a small detail. It's not. Dennis bought it 2 years ago and I was the one who seasoned it and learned how to use it, and it made better eggs than anything else in that kitchen, and I was not leaving it. I took the skillet. I took my things. I signed the lease on the apartment and moved in on a Saturday with 2 friends who didn't ask too many questions and brought food. I made dinner that night in my own kitchen for the first time. Used the skillet. It worked the same as it always did. Some things travel. A month after the party, I got a card in the mail. No return address. Handwriting I recognized as my grandmother's. Inside, a single index card. On it, in her handwriting, she didn't look. Until she did. "Love, Grandma." She'd heard the recording. Remembered the line. And sent it back to me as something different than what Dennis had meant by it. She doesn't look. Until she did. I have it on my refrigerator. Every morning when I make breakfast, I see it. Every morning I think about 11 days. About a grocery list made on a Thursday night. About an attorney called on a Friday morning. About a speaker set up in a corner of my mother's living room. About 43 people in a room and a recording, and a man with a champagne glass who thought she doesn't look was a condition he could depend on. He was wrong. I looked. And then I made sure everyone else did too.